We'll switch here in a second. Let's let you guys get tucked in. All right, my dudes. Sorry for that. Let's go. Main camera. Live in studio. I think I show them on this microphone, actually. Make sure it focuses. Focus. What's up, my dudes? How's it going? Sorry, of course, I start a live stream and we get business calls throughout the day. This is usually like my kind of, I call it the lunch period, where I would have a pretty consistent schedule starting at 12. So thank you guys for the ones that are hanging in here and looking. You guys can hear me. Make sure everything is good to go on audio and video and all that fun stuff. We may or may not use the screens today. I might switch over to the whiteboard to talk through some stuff. That's why I have the lapel mic on today. Originally, we were going to talk about just kind of what's going on leading up to this election. Why is the market starting to pump? From my opinion of seeing just, the capital that's rolling in, the amount of calls that we're getting from facility builds and just people refreshing equipment. And just seeing the fervor that comes with the beginnings of a bull market. So I wanted to kind of go through today of kind of what are some of those leading indicators, but I kid you not, the amount of folks that have reached out to us specifically asking about, if there is a presidential change here in a few weeks, what's kind of a leading indicator of what you were looking for from like the crypto bill that was bipartisanly pushed through and then ultimately vetoed by President Biden. If that gets reworked and or sent back through, does it get approved? And what is the impact for that? Because there's a huge amount of folks out there that are very Bitcoin maxi and just like screw the banks, all that kind of stuff. And I try to look at everything from a different lens. And I've always done this. You guys know me, that's been in this space for a long time. I look at decentrally participation, which from the mining side, I love that aspect. I don't have to ask for permission. I can find some code, run that code, start a node, learn what Bitcoin mining was, started Bitcoin mining very early, went into these other networks that were proof of work, and then showed you guys how to participate in that. Again, it was just us having a conversation, running some code, and getting compensated for our effort on the security layer of these different networks, right? And it's just a math problem to figure out, does that make sense from a financial investment standpoint, meaning you're going to buy hardware, that's a capital expenditure like CapEx, and then what's the rate of return in the translation to dollars, right? Or can you use your Bitcoin to buy services and other products and stuff with the Bitcoin through the appreciation of Bitcoin because it's the hardest money on the planet. So all of that being said, none of that really involved the government or any kind of permission or anything, right? I love that concept of it. I'm a very process-oriented person. My background being in, black belt and green belt Six Sigma, looking at process flows and management, optimization, trying to lean out the process. And I kind of go through a couple things with you guys of why this matters, because there's a lot of like Bitcoin maxis, like screw all that, screw the banks. Like, we don't want any of that kind of stuff. And I completely understand that perspective. We've all been screwed over by a bank in some capacity. There's a lot of predatory actions that happen. They get fined for it. Nobody goes to jail. There's a lot of negative aspects to certain business processes. And I look at it like, okay, there's different approaches to be able to participate in this ecosystem. And I'm saying the ecosystem of life, meaning like you can try to go get banked, you can get screwed over by fees, you could use Bitcoin, also potentially get screwed over by fees if you're doing something like Ethereum back in the day and trying to send Ethereum when the network was clogged and you're spending like $80 and everybody's laughing at it going, why is this better? There's a lot of different aspects to it, but landing on one particular issue and then just saying, I'm going to die on this hill, I don't want part of it, I think is a bad approach. You got to kind of look at it and see, is things changing on said network? Is there alternatives to that? What's this alternative over here, from the different coins? And then look at, do you participate or do you not participate in it or not? I'm saying all that because if you look at like I'll roll it right back into like a bipartisan bill that makes it through the US that maybe gives the banks the ability to participate in this space. There's a couple interesting dimensions that happen with their current practice of work versus if they were a custodial for crypto. And I look at why a lot of people look at that as a bullish sentiment is because of, I'm going to roll it right back to the concept of the Six Sigma aspect and the amount of seams you collapse whenever you would have the concept of a bank handling crypto in some capacity. Again, not your keys, not your coins, but if you're looking at it from an aspect of various participants that can get into the space, you've now deleted some seams that are there right now. Meaning, if you have just a person that's not really into crypto or any kind of like tech stack, but they have a bank account and they log into their bank account after, let's say, this bipartisan bill passes, and the banks integrate these chains, at least the bigger chains, into their front ends of their the login when you're going into your bank. You now have this whole new potential of individual that isn't going to take the time to go get KYC AML at an exchange. They're like, I don't even know what that is. I don't want to download a new app. I don't want to give other people more information that I don't know who they are, to where they already have a relationship with their bank. They are already integrated. Their paycheck's probably coming in. They log in to check their account every day. And if you have this new feature pop up and it says Bitcoin and it has a buy option, if a bank is facilitating that action, the back end of that is either going to be one of a few things. They're going to have some kind of API connection back to an exchange, and they're obfuscating any of that technical data or debt to the customer, because now they're going to handle all that activity. So now that customer doesn't need to go to an exchange to purchase crypto. It gives you an entirely new set of potential liquidity and people that are going to take a position in crypto that is a much easier seam kind of situation. And that to me is extremely bullish from an aspect of price because of the scarcity of crypto, the scarcity of chains that have limited supplies, that have a schedule that's published, that we can independently verify. That's different than the current banking system on fractional reserve banking, meaning, let's say you have $1 million in the bank and you show up there to take your money out. Let's say you have I've had this happen to me before with like 15 grand. Went to withdraw $15,000 to go buy something, a trailer. And it was like, yeah, why do you need that money? And there was all these questions, right? The integration and the pipeline that's set up for crypto, while they could create a delay from a security side, just like exchanges do. If you try to withdraw a lot, they'll put out like 2-factor, they'll send you an email. There's some process to it because they are trying to prevent somebody getting scammed and some of the things that can happen. You have this other aspect that from a fractional reserve side, they may not have the money in the bank for your fiat, but they have to be whole on your crypto. So less fees you're sending out. They can't reapothecate it. They can't create new coins. There's not just a decorum, there's a mechanical, physical difference between them taking fractional reserve versus absolute reserve, right? So you end up having this potential on the amount of banks, in being like, if you're encoding, it's like a variable, meaning you could have tens of thousands of banks and participate in this in a matter of a year or so, right? And then you would have this amount of people that now could start taking positions, even if it's $5 here, $8 here, whatever. And you have this large supply reduction on the amount of available coins out there. So I look at, like, I'm kind of rolling this back from most likely, if there is a presidential shift, that if they're pro crypto and they get that bipartisan bill through the House and the Senate and it's not vetoed, and then you give the capacity for the banks to compete in this space versus the exchanges, you create this interesting dynamic, at least in, the United States, huge liquidity center of capital, to where now you have individuals that would have never bought crypto or don't want to give their information to other exchanges the opportunity to make it seamless, because they're already KYC'd. They're already AML KYC'd in their bank. It's already done. They've been there. Maybe a person might have a bank account for years. And then now there's this new feature that they could go and hold their crypto in. You got this expansion of wallets, web wallets and phone wallets that could use for tap pay and all this stuff from a crypto aspect. You have this entire pipeline of NFTs and other features that are on some of these chains when it comes to digital identities. And I'm not saying there's a fine line of like CBDCs, which are terrible, and a digital identity, which if used to track all kinds of behavior is the wrong use of it. But like, if you think of it like a digital identity as single sign-on works, meaning you have a Google account and your Google account is your single sign-on to many applications on the web. And it seamlessly allows you to navigate to all these different products and services because you're already verified. You have an account. It's an anchor that you can now plot down into these different accesses, having that financial connection in that way to where now it is a bridge in the same kind of concept of why, MetaMask and Ethereum originally, from a Web3 standpoint, you had it built into your browser. You could navigate to all these payment sites. If you were doing Doge Dice or any of these or not Doge Dice, but like something like it, if you were doing some of the horse betting or whatever, it was all integrated in the browser and you're signing it right there. That essentially is acting as your wallet ID, your digital ID, and tied to your finances. It's creating a very seamless interaction where you don't have all this overhead. You don't have to expose more information that you don't need. And it all comes back down to a digital fingerprint that gets you in because you want to go in. The difference is how is that data exploited in a way to cause risk to you. It's like doing a SWOT analysis of what's the good about this and what's the terrible thing about this, and how do we create the separation to prevent bad actors and or government abuse or enforcement abuse, any of those kind of things, to take advantage of that tech stack and then flip it on everybody, right? So I think it's if you have the right personnel discussing these matters that are familiar with the tech stack enough to say, here's your seam analysis and here's what matters and here's what I don't want to have happen. So how do we create this stopgap? And there's ways to do this, folks. I mean, the conversation can't be as linear as this is dead to me because all roads lead to shit. When we all know single sign-on is way better than sitting there typing in a fucking password everywhere, right? There is a bridge, I think, on the financial side, just like digital identities have done on single sign-on, that the financial aspects could be the same way, to where we don't have to keep putting in all this information into all these different databases to make financial transactions. You could have obfuscated transactions and you could have, not carry so much other data that really is irrelevant to some purchases, right? And then be able to do that from an existing institution that you may already have a good working relationship with. Like my local bank here that we use, I have a great relationship with them. They've been very good capital partners for us on things that we've needed to do. That was giving me decent interest rates, always looking at my best, optimization of the way we spend funds and stuff. They have been a tool and an asset to me. Now, I've had also experiences with banks that has been absolute crap. And it seems to be the larger banks. And it's because I think the lower staff, and it's not that they're lower people or anything, they just have no power of any sort. And they're just following the script. I think pushing those activities to the edge gets you a much better experience. I've always recommended to people is find a local bank, one that you're like, what is that little thing? It's like some small town bank. Go in there, meet them, talk to the president of the bank, build a relationship with that institution. So whenever they do adopt these newer feature sets, once it's approved for bank charters to have this, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is a great example of this. That is an institution that sets the charters for banks. They work with FINRA and the SEC, all these different financial institutions, FinCEN, all of that get in check, and then give the guidance to a bank on how to participate. And then that bank can then create services from that boutique of what's the rules, right? And the structure of it's like the rules to any game, right? I mean, I am not, you got to always look at any bad idea or any bad structure or bad regulation, and you kind of look at what was the original intention of it and what's being exploited, maybe by the government, maybe by people that just made it bad. Ticketmaster is a perfect example. Oh, we're going to have this awesome site that will allow us to look at any game in the world and be able to purchase tickets. How seamless is this? It's a terrible system because it's been exploited in many various ways from not just people that exploit the APIs and steal all the tickets of a thing and then resell them on resale markets. And then you try to get customer support and it's trash. Like, there's certain things of automation that has went very bad. And anybody that's, just see in the comments if people have had any experience dealing with something like Ticketmaster on this is a perfect example, is because I've had less than ideal. StubHub's kind of the same way. There's certain aspects of tech that don't necessarily go the way they're originally intended to do. I mean, you've seen Zuckerberg come on there and say, hey, I was just trying to make Facebook and friends, and now we're like information super highway of potentially bad shit. And now that people can parse and find behavior analysis and get this whole like scripted thing of what a person is based on their interactions socially, but not really know them as an individual. So now you have this separation of like the persona versus the real, right? And then you're judged on the persona side, right? They don't actually know you. I think that's part of the issue with like the centralization of some of those services and stuff, right? So if banking inherits this new tech stack because that bipartisan bill makes it through, I think your best interaction at that will be those small edge banks on the side that maybe are a little more conservative, but if you're a crypto person and you're pretty versed in discussing stuff with them, go in there and make those relationships. We've talked to the bank board here at our banks here. I've actually tried to talk to all the boards around this whole area. If it's from zoning and planning commissions to the county to the mayors and the police, the fire, everybody, to make sure they understand what crypto and how it works on like proof of work and mining, and then also understand the tangentials, which are the payment networks, and how future litigation and future lawmaking will affect what they do in our interaction on the crypto side with them, just to keep them educated, right? I think we're all in our own way able to communicate that if you're into this space, right? You got to keep people informed of what that information is. And I'm excited. I'm super bullish in this space right now, because I think it's finally starting to break through to larger scale. I mean, there's all kinds of risk we all know with companies like BlackRock and larger entities because of some of the behaviors that they've exhibited or been linked to that are actually fact stuff, not necessarily like speculative stuff, but like actual fact things that have happened on some of these larger institutions. I look at it more less of a risk from Bitcoin and cryptocurrency chains in general, because they can't do all the screw. Oh, they could try, but it's way harder for them to try to cover up any tracks or anything like that when it comes to like, if you have a deposit of Bitcoin in your bank account and you go to withdraw it, they have to be whole. It has to be made whole. It is not a fractional, it's a absolute minus whatever fee structures they have. And then in the terms of service is where they're going to put in when can you withdraw and all that. And I would say, let it be free market, baby. Whoever ends up giving the best terms of service on being able to withdraw your funds, let the banks compete, let them duke it out. There's going to be banks that are hungry to get those services and provide the best service for you. And then it's our all job to lay out the banks that are just bad participants, right? I mean, there's a ton of people out there that'll say, hey, Chase shut down my account, or, Wells Fargo did this, or JP Morgan did this, whatever, which is Chase, Bank of America, whatever. I haven't seen or messed with any of those banks for years, right? I've stopped using those kind of banks. I use local banks only. So again, I'm beating on the pretty heavy on the bullish case here, but I'm trying to do it in an aspect that is just step back, look at the field, and what are we really looking at here at the end of the day? You can have opinions of, and I think everybody should have, that are that maybe you don't like the concept of crypto and traditional finance mixing. The reality is it's here. It is integrated. It is happening. Payment channels have been set up. They're ETFs, exchange traded funds, larger mutual funds. There are positions of HODL in place with a large amount of these institutions. You have sovereign wealth funds, you have retirement funds taking positions in crypto, right? And that, as that grows, they leverage that in some way. Now, they're not selling the necessary underlying asset, the crypto itself, but because it's ballooning in value, people will take loans against it. You'll have essentially like a 401k loan, kind of what Coinbase was doing there for a little bit. Where if you had coins in Coinbase, you could take a like 70-30 split loan against it. That's in a volatile crypto world, that's a risk, right? Where if you're borrowing at all-time high, it's probably not the best time. Like if we punch through 80,000, which I firmly believe we'll get into November, and I think I'm making a price prediction here. Do your own research, my dudes, but I'm thinking that we'll punch through 80 in November. If it punches through that and you're like, cool, I have this institution that will let me loan against my crypto, and you take a 70-30 on there, Bitcoin could slide back down 70%. So just be wary and risk there that you could probably get a margin call when it gets close to like 40%. Because remember, on 50-50 on 80 is 40, and it could definitely slide back down to 30 at any point. So you're really close to margin call if you were taking a 70-30 split there. I would never do a 50-50 because we know that crypto's had many instances where it's dropped below 50%. And then when you look at some of these extra coins, I mean, the performance of the alts versus Bitcoin right now is interesting because Bitcoin's doing pretty well. The alts are starting to kind of pump, but like Ethereum's still under $3,000, I think, unless it's made a change today. But like it was 4,200 when Bitcoin was last at like 80,000 or 72,000 back in May of 21. It was, at 42, and it's been just sitting in the mid twos. And I have all kinds of opinions of why that's probably the way it is. I think Ethereum dropping out of proof of work was one of its stupidest moves that it ever did, because it lost an entire liquidity pool of individuals that were investing in the infrastructure, and they co-opted this design on proof of stake, which it was always in the white paper. I get it. But like, you also got to look at the economics of what's going on here. When you have investments pouring into mine the coin, you also have a counterparty that says, I'm not going to buy all those GPUs, but I will buy the asset because I see all these people spending all this money here. And you create this kind of speculative fervor because of the investments. And then you get the use cases, you get other things that are on it, which I think is the only thing really holding it up right now, which is the participation in all the different subcoins, meme coins. If you look at the activity and the inflow of capital on those ERC20 tokens and 721, I think it's 721 tokens, when you're creating all the memes and stuff on there, Solana as an example too, getting a lot of the memes. Goatius Maximus, that kind of stuff, right? Of like creating a fervor of activity on the chain. People are paying the underlying fees on it. Keep some of the activity there, but it's really used for DeFi stuff. not really usable use case stuff, right? You have an entire other mechanism under proof of work coins that people can, you're creating a whole secondary market on top of these coins. And I think that's a macro thing that's not looked at enough, is looking at, you have the underlying asset we have, Bitcoin as its value and its value proposition with its scarcity has, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and bore you to death with those. Sailor has way better articulation on the, the value proposition of that. But we handle a lot of stuff with mining, right? So I look at this as an entire other ecosystem that is in support of the security layer of this, that has a huge amount of capital investment in it too, right? So, and that capital investment gets that reward for upholding the security model. And it creates an entire other aspect to the reinforcement of those networks. And I think that was some calculus that wasn't ran, back with Ethereum and some of these other chains that have just moved away to like a proof of stake standpoint. This is the, I think there should probably be some more science to tie in those two things together, because it is why it's not super linear. There is a measurable organic nature of just the amount of engagement that you get from that. I mean, just think of all of us YouTubers, social media folks. I wouldn't dare say influencers, but like people that were teaching everybody else through our own experiences how to participate in, like I'm using the Ethereum as an example. And now we do most of our content with Bitcoin, right? That's an entire other ecosystem that's now part of this, right? So that you lose with any proof of work coin. And I think that economically, other coins that don't have maybe the liquidity, or maybe they're not on an exchange, a big exchange that gives them access to liquidity, those activities that are happening on those chains that are still proof of work, that just don't have the liquidity to kind of get the exposure out there or participate, or like YouTubers covering it, that type of thing, of what their opportunities to like do merge mining. And if we look at like Litecoin and Dogecoin, Litecoin was the biggest recipient of activity the second Dogecoin and then merged, right? Because Dogecoin's what's really got the fervor of activity when it comes to engagement. And from a script algorithm standpoint, it's like the anchor in script. And looking at the amount of people that, when you're buying a Litecoin miner, I mean, essentially you're getting Dogecoin too, right? And Dogecoin is the majority of that revenue, right? So it keeps Litecoin from a proof of work participation standpoint in the upper echelon of proof of work potential aspects, right? So very pro proof of work, obviously the old, beating a dead horse there for anybody that watches our content. But I wanted to try to kind of break into that, because I've had a lot of, into this conversation today. We were going to kind of cover some recent events in that, but I think most specifically, if I was to narrow down the bull perspective that I'm looking at from, participation and stuff like that, is the passing of that bill that would allow these new participants coming in. But again, I wanted to make sure I was explaining it to the larger group of, like, everybody's like, oh, you're pro bank, you're like this negative, like unmaxy kind of ideology. And it's like, no, man, I'm just looking at the reality of potential people that now can come into this ecosystem that are tangentially paying attention to it, but are just like, the moment you lose them right away when I say, oh, you got to download an app and you got to give your information, including like your bank account and your ID, passport, all the stuff that you guys have to do when you sign up for an exchange. And everybody's like, get wrecked. There's no way, right? You're losing a huge amount of people potential that want to interact in this space. And where we've helped get directly into mining, because they're just like, I'm just going to mine it. And then I'm like, oh, by the way, when you want to go to sell it, you got to go make that thing you were trying to avoid, unless you can get, just pay for your services and your products in Bitcoin. That's a way to do it too. But that's just kind of giving you guys like my perspective on it. Again, it's a perspective. I'm just trying to, we used to use this term a lot, especially in like planning, called a swag. It's a scientific wild ass guess. That's a swag. I think that's my swag on this thing. I think that if there is a presidential change, that it creates a potential, because who knows if I'm Trump or Vance or any of them are going to actually execute on pushing through a crypto bill. Nobody knows. I mean, they claim they will, but like, does that move the opportunity now to, the banks and the other participants? And I don't know everything in that crypto bill. I mean, there's quite a few other stuff in there, but does it give some access to start this kind of new adoption or tech stack, adoption into the system to allow more people to participate with less seams? It's all about seams, man. Like, at the end of the day, it's about how streamlined can I be on things that are pretty complicated or require or have a potential for lots of mistakes, right? At the end of the day, when you start looking at kind of like a Six Sigma ideology of looking through things, what you're trying to do is get rid of the gaps in a process. I'll give you an example, like from a green belt standpoint. When I was going through doing a green belt certification, I used to work for a company called Anheuser-Busch. Most of you guys probably know that company. It's a beer company, and this was in the mid 2000s. I would call it almost top tier AB content. You had the what's up, you had all this really interesting ad campaign aspects of it. But at the end of the day, their design and aspect to business was really on the top of the tier. Like, we had companies like Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola come watch what we were doing. And I did multiple roles there. And one of the roles that I was a pricing and I was a margin analyst. And I went out to do a few projects at some warehouses, some of the warehouses that we owned. And you can see and think of this as I tell you this kind of story, think of it from like the crypto aspects, Web3, any kind of workflow, smart contract stuff. Just think of it like, think of this current thread, because this is what I'm thinking about now and some of these aspects of where we could get if crypto was the primary asset being used in some of these processes. But I had a very basic goal. When you do a green belt Six Sigma process, your job is to try to lean out something like a process, like how can I make this more efficient? And in my thing that we had to tackle was out of stocks. We were running into a lot of this is when the 16 ounce cans that first came out, the ones that look like bottles. They have a lot of aluminum on them. They stay cold longer. They were running out. This is when they were first introduced. And they were like, how can we have a 3-tier system? Producer makes stuff. It goes to a wholesaler. Wholesaler sells it to retailer. Retailer split off in 2 different types. It's on premise and off premise. On premise is when you're drinking on premise. You're at a Buffalo Wild Wings, something like that. Off premise is like a grocery store or a C-store, when you're going in and you're just grabbing product and going somewhere with it. So that's kind of the structure, right? And if you think about how all that stuff's wired up, essentially you had pedal and pre-sell environments. Pedals when exactly what it means. A dude has some product on a truck, shows up at a store, goes, hey, I'm peddling you my wares. What are you out of? Let me fill you up, and then we'll just write a thing at the end of what the inventory is. And that was like a daily thing. You would show up to the store like, hey, yay, the guy's here. We're out of this. You fill it in. Then you have something called pre-sell, which is what everything moved to, where you have like a sales guy show up, do an inventory, and the next day you just got a guy bringing product in to the store that has been pre-sold. The problem with like the pre-sell side and the frequency of showing up to stores is you would load a store, but you might not go to that store again for maybe 4 days. Well, they were running out of product the first day. So it's like you would do these things called hot shots to get product into a store kind of that was out. Like you'd have a store call you and go, hey man, I'm out of this. Everybody keeps asking me for it. Bring it to me. That would go to an office at a warehouse that they had to like take the post-it note. I got to take, maybe they're between shifts, like guys coming in at 4 o'clock and the guys are working the evenings, and they miss the communication to have the product pulled to take to the store that same day. There's a lot of gaps and risk and issue with trying to get product from point A to point B. This is like logistics 101 stuff, right? But how can you get rid of that whole process? So I went in there and I was like, if I was king for a day, you lay out on a whiteboard all of the steps in that process and you look, can I delete any of these? And this is kind of like first principle stuff. This is the basis of what like Elon Musk companies do, is what I'm about to walk you guys through. And they look at the whole thing and they go, can I delete any of this? What do I need this person? Do I need this process? Well, how can I make this faster? And what we ended up finding is I looked at it and was like, what if I have the scan data? When you're buying a product and you're going through a store, you're scanning it out. It's hidden in an inventory system, maybe locally, maybe downrange to another store. And do you have the ability to capture that data? Would that company send me their real-time inventory if we incentivize them in some way? And meaning the incentivization would be capturing what their sales are and then looking what happens when they have out of stock and when they don't have out of stock. And if I could keep them full all the time, they're going to make X amount more margin. I'm going to say, if I could know when you're running out, let's put a threshold there, and I get a communication well in advance because I'm keeping some kind of aggregate rolling to see when you're about out of inventory. And you can see buying patterns, after C stores as an example. In this example, we used a C store. We could see at 4 o'clock to like 7 o'clock, sales are nuts, right? People are getting off work, they're grabbing some beer, they're going home or whatever product, right? So we were like, if we could get ahead of that, like 2 o'clock and you were close, or what's your average sell versus yesterday? I'm going to put an aggregate in there that's going to put an order amount that I'm going to need to fill you up with by that maybe 5 o'clock time frame that same day. And then that is going to bypass the whole process and send me a signal to my route accounting system at a wholesaler. And it's going to go straight to the forklift guy that's on duty right now. And that's going to become his number one priority. He's going and picking stuff and doing his own thing. And then he gets to put the screen on his forklift. Mind you, we had to get OSHA approval for that because you're blocking a view. Nice little screen up there. And it doesn't matter what he's doing. It pops up and says, hey, some C store downrange needs this product like today. We put a printer on his forklift. He would stop what he's doing. He would go pick what he needed, drop it in the drive-through, pull off the invoice off this printer that's on his same forklift, throw it on the pallet, bump his horn to operations to let them know that they got a delivery. So I'm skipping all of this process. I'm skipping the store telling somebody. I'm skipping the warehouse picking up the call. I'm skipping all of these things. I'm going straight from the person walking out the store straight to the guy picking the product in the warehouse, right? Just skipping all of them. And then it goes in and backfills all that required information through essentially an order shell, a shell of information that needs to be filled out as part of that automation. Mind you, guys, we were doing this in 2005. This is a beer company. Like, can you imagine, like right now, like there's other companies right now that don't do this kind of thing right now. They don't do it. And this was before AI. This is before any of this stuff. We were able to wire up and essentially to find out who is on the job. And this is kind of one of those real-time things you find out when you're building this process of like, well, how do I know who's on duty? Well, most of these guys clock in and I can find out who's on lunch, who's there. It reads the time clock server, finds out who's logged in to find out who's on the forklift. There's always a way to get things done. It's just an understanding of process, right? So this is a perfect example of leaning out the process to where you never run out of stock. And now if you go into a store, I bet you find product on those shelves. And it gives this false dichotomy that, oh, they're not selling anything. It's like, no, man, we got that thing so efficient now, they don't run out of stock. it is always, you always have a product as a consumer there. And you can take those kind of concepts and look at it downrange on all kinds of different things, right? It's understanding that process flow and being able to change that. The whole reason why I'm telling you all this is that the wiring up of all these types of systems, all the work that we had to do between all that stuff, the different systems, the time clock server, Chronos, the route accounting system was very special for each of the wholesalers, the EDI exchange, all these interface agreements, all this crap we had to wire up to make this all work, like could be on a page of code in any of these crypto chains. That well, Bitcoin would be a little tough because there's not much of a scripting language to it. It's just unspent transaction output metadata. But like something like an Ethereum, something like anything, even Ravencoin could technically do it, but it would be, you'd want something a little faster block time, and you'd want something that doesn't have a limited supply, because you need to have that concept of a gas fee. Because you're going to spend, and that spend is going to essentially the stamp that something happened. And so then it's locked in that contract, and that's spent, it's gone. And then you have like burn activity and stuff of the chain. So, but you could streamline that entire process I just said, lifting it out of all of those systems of record and having that as your fabric, right? This is the stuff that I look at from an architecture standpoint every day. When people are like, well, what is BBT doing? Most of the time I'm doing some kind of architecture stuff like that during the day. And I happen to run Bitcoin mines also because I love doing it. But that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about here, that the people that are paying attention at that level and building application services, building API interfaces, XML, payloads, all of that stuff is looking at it, of seeing these chains that are already incentivized to exist. It's not a third-party company with a data center somewhere. It is decentralized participants upholding the network and processing transactions. And our activities are already in place, in process, and have nothing to do with those developers other than providing them a network and a good security layer to operate. And I think as we start to see bills like we're seeing go through Congress that provide the framework for large companies to invest in this space, because now they have things that they can operate against federally and states, then that gives them the rules to the game that they need to play within, that then that code could then be written to facilitate certain business opportunities and actions, which partisanly across all of us have a use case for this fabric that we're all upholding from like a proof of work in that aspect. So I probably lost and bored half of you guys on this explanation. You can let me know in the comments if this is it's typically, we don't get down into this kind of weeds, but obviously I wanted to bring up something today that was a little more meat on the bone for you guys to kind of think through on why somebody like me is very bullish. I'm giving you the substance of why I'm bullish. So, I'm going to open it up for some questions and stuff because we're almost at the top of the hour, my dudes. I started a little late, so I'll go a little late. Let me know if you guys have any questions on any of this. I mean, we're at 155 in channel. You know what? I'm actually going to bring up and see on X if you guys are asking questions on there too. I kind of have been unfortunately ignoring any of the chat on these other platforms. Let me see if there's any kind of questions there while we're going, my dudes. Got 106 live on X. I'm going to load up the chat here. See if anybody's in that one. I got that one open. I'm going to open. We also live streaming right now on Twitch. Yankee says, yes, love this stuff. Please educate me. I don't know. Like anytime you start talking about like Six Sigma and like processes and stuff, it's super boring. So hopefully it was informative in some capacity for you guys. It's an amazing live stream. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to ask you guys too on this. I've been toying around the idea of maybe having guests during these live streams and kind of make it almost like a longer podcast style. Let me know, or if you guys want me to reach out to anybody specific, happy to discuss this with maybe somebody else. I mean, nobody's really reached out to us to be part of it. I mean, I've had the Mining Pod and a few other ones reach out to me to have as a guest type of thing, and I've done some of those. But what's my thought on ocean mining pool? So I did talk to Luke Dasher on and mining, mining disrupt. I mean, I think it's an interesting concept. The problem I think with the ocean is it's not a problem. There's just the methodologies on how you're going to approach a mining pool, and there's some ethos that people really stick to, and I think they're very Bitcoin purists. And there's certain aspects that they would include and not include in blocks. And I think it's if I wouldn't dare call it a religion, but I would say if it's a set of features and behavior that you want to participate in, you have an option there. There were certain aspects that I wasn't fully understanding of where they were trying to go. But I think there's also some aspects that I did understand when they were looking at where, like, if you wanted to do solo mining through it and that kind of thing, I liked the idea of that. The folks that are out there with like BitAxe and stuff that are having to use, I think public-pool.io for, their solar mining. I would like to see more options in that aspect in the open source side of the solo mine stuff. Eugene Mini Miner, you're the reason I got into IT. You're the OG. Thanks, my dude. That's great. Hopefully you're having a good career and you're learning. Any tips on keeping snow out of the ant boxes? You could use a return. So Elliot, we had to help a group in Canada answer this exact problem. And what we ended up doing is the way the ant boxes deliver the exhaust without any kind of assistance. If you lift that ant box, you'll end up having, and the louvers are pressed down, you'll have a wraparound that goes underneath it and actually pulls back in through the intake. So if you put it up on like the 18-inch blocks, your ant box, naturally you're going to get an inflow underneath the container, and it'll come back up through the intake side. And then you can have essentially blocking. We use just hard plastic that was bolted onto the bottoms of the exhaust side. And then in the winter, we would just have them take off those covers, and then it actually naturally pushes the hot air underneath the container, thereby heating up the intake side. And it's not hot enough in the cold winter where there's snow to offset too much, and you can control how much heat comes through there by addressing how much space you're covering on the exhaust side wrap around underneath the container. So bottom line, use a recapture of that heat and reduct it. It could be as rudimentary as just capturing a portion of that exhaust heat on the outside part of the louvers and ducting it around to blow in front of the container and keep all your miners from getting snow inside of it. Because you should be generating, if you have 210 machines in there, hell, we had a box that has 150 machines in there, and it generates more than enough heat to keep the snow out. And I mean, and this was in a like upper Alberta climate. So, I mean, you're talking some pretty intense snowstorms and temperatures, sub 20 degree temps. And you actually had to use part of that. We did have to keep the whole top row. We had them pull everything out of that top machine or the top box, because the top row on the Bitmain N5 V2s lay down, so the miners are not upright, you can pull that whole top row or a portion of that top row. Do not put the blockers on there and allow the return heat to come into the container, because if it gets too low, like at least for the ant miners, you can actually chill them out to where they won't operate in the like sub-zero degrees. Like if the intake's too cold, they'll shut off. Homebrew Mining is asking, have you explored any smaller POW ecosystems like Casper or Alpinium? So I think it's Alpinium. Alphium. I did have a client that had a couple machines on Alphium very early, and we put a couple machines on it too. So just to see what that ecosystem, we never covered it. It was kind of just like a spec mine. I used to mine another currency with those two machines, and we decided just to pivot it to Alphium pretty early. But other than that, I haven't covered any more. I completely the Caspa, when it dropped and everybody was talking about it, we were like mid build in a couple sites, and it was just like all my attention was going to those, on top of a lot of the consulting work that I do from a solution architect side. I was super busy with a couple of big projects with that, so I just missed the whole boat on Caspa, and I just haven't fully researched it enough to feel comfortable with it at that time. I know that the ecosystem's really grown. They're doing a lot of stuff with ASIC mining. But yeah, I just haven't really captured it. It seemed like the few times I've looked at their miners, they seemed extremely expensive. And knowing how much miners cost in creation. Now, granted, when you first tape out something, it's pretty expensive and it takes a while to get your return. They just seem disproportionately expensive for the risk that's involved personally for me. But, we were picking up miners at one point in 2021 for like $12,000 for a Bitcoin S19. So there is that. And now they're, sub $200, but, there's some risk with everything, I guess. But yeah, no, I don't have a ton of experience on the Caspa side. I mean, we still do mine Ravencoin. I'm still a big believer in Ravencoin. I like the architecture, being UTXO with the assets in it. It's very lean. Again, that whole lean conversation we had in this. It's very simplistic when it comes to its design. It's just essentially Bitcoin with a few more features that give it the latitude to do some of those more advanced features when it comes to asset management, but still keeping a very clean development history that it's inheriting from Bitcoin, which puts a lot more of that risk aspect for me down. When I see stuff like multiple releases on Cardano, multiple releases on some of these other coins that are adding all kinds of new features, I get super worried when you start having any of the chains that have multiple database kind of architectures, like Ethereum has essentially 3 core databases, and keeping things in sync, and the bridging risk with contracts. You had all this extra complexity that can actually screw you. So I look at chains that are way less complex when it comes just purely for the monetary aspects of it. But like the improvements that can come to these can definitely help better. But for proof of work side, still doing some stuff with Ravencoin on that. We're actually going on a Ravencoin cruise at the end of or at the beginning of the month, November 9th. We'll be doing a live stream from the cruise. We've done now, it's a 3rd or 4th cruise now with Tron Black and some of the Ravencoin folks. Alpha has UTXO with living assets on chain instead of smart contracts similar to Ravencoin. I need to verify that. We just literally degened into it, my dudes. Like, I do not know a ton about it, to be honest with you. It was more of like other folks that I know that started mining it, and gave me the pitch. And I was like, we could point a couple of these machines. I think I was mining eGem. That was the one I was trying to remember, which was essentially a Ethereum fork that was using Ethereum's basic stuff. It was like Ubiq and eGem were 2 coins that I was looking at for a while that I stopped mining. So still bullish on Raven. I mean, I like the ecosystem. I like the people that built the code and still write code for it. from a price aspect, I have no idea. I mean, I hope that people can leverage the features in it, and then that will create essentially that value for people to want to see it as an investment aspect. But like at the end of the day, I do like the features of what it provides and the simplicity of the interactions to build code to it compared to a lot of other coins. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's still always been bullish on Raven, been part of it, mining forever and been part of that ecosystem and community for quite a long time and still continue to be. On Twitch, we had a couple people talking to Pirate Maniac 2023. I love you too, my dude. Thanks for the bits. Love it. We had questions on X. Do you think it'd be profitable? Scale can be reached by an individual expanding an ASIC farm using hosting. Hosting is an interesting dynamic because at the end of the day, when you get into low hash price, it all comes down to you want to be the last person that could turn off. And that is meaning that you are the lowest cost of the aspect. Hosting environments are very hard. You can see that with what happened with Compass, with other companies, but hosting is a kind of a necessary thing for people to be able to take advantage of that live in maybe areas or climates that don't are not good for you to mine in. Like as an example, I have folks that reach out to us from like downtown Manhattan, New York. I'm like, hey, I want to mine, but I have two 15 amp circuits. I can't use that for a Bitcoin miner. It's going to piss the neighbors off, and I'm going to keep popping circuits. There is no 240 unless I turn off. I literally had this guy that was using his dryer plug, and he would just unplug his dryer when he's not using it, and you mine with coins. And then eventually the neighbors, even though he had some baffling, they made him stop. And he's like, it was just one hosted machine, right? But like, there are just situations in where people live that just are not able. Maybe their power is extremely expensive, where they'd be happy to pay 6-7 cents for mining, and are just going long, right? They're not looking at the immediate rate of return, and they know that they may be upside down paying a host fee, but in the end, they're getting coins from a freshly minted source that they're not buying through an exchange. And some people are like, just buy the coin. Part of your issue is if you try to buy on an exchange, there's a couple ways to buy on exchanges. If you're just going and buying spot price, and we had this on the last discussion last week, you're going to pay fees. You're going to pay higher fees. If you buy $100, $200 in Bitcoin, you might pay up to $9 in a fee. You're paying like 10% almost, 8%. If you're doing spot market orders where you're becoming a maker, not a taker, you'll pay maybe 0.5%. So you wire in the money for free, or if your bank has a wire charge, maybe it's $20. You got to take the total cost of the thing, right? So the argument on like, well, I'm buying a coin and it's when you buy it at that time, and what's all your cumulative fees end up adding, and then when you go to sell it, what's your cumulative fees, and at the end of the day, what was the true delta of what you spent in fees and transaction versus what you had. And then from an aspect of mining, you make a sunk cost in a piece of equipment that you can depreciate, and as it mines, you're earning. And then your only real fixed cost is your power cost based on what was the load factor? Was it 24/7, 365, or did you only have it running on the most optimal times? I have folks that we have worked with before that live in Pennsylvania that have they can only mine essentially 16 hours a day. And the prime or the peak times of the day, they turn off. And those 16 hours equates to a certain amount. Their average all-in cost is about 6 cents at their house, which is a really good rate. If you take the prime times and add it up, it ends up being around 12 cents, 11 cents. So they figured out mathematically that it was 6 cents was a good thing. They were able to buy a cheap miner, and now they run it in their garage. And it actually, from a cost aspect, they're earning a dollar cost average equivalent of Bitcoin mining, and that is where they're getting it. And it's the first kind of clean version of coin where if you're going out to an exchange or you try to buy it from like a Bitcoin ATM, you're getting coins with history. And does that history have some kind of illicit activity on it that at some point down range, you go to trade those coins in, depending where you got them from, and somebody does some forensics on it and says, hey, well, that went through Silk Road because that's a legacy old coin. And you're like, what are you talking about, dude? I just went to an ATM and picked it up. So wherever the source of the coins matter, and you'll end up probably being clear, and they'll just like, you'll fill out this BS report and you'll send in like, dude, here's where I bought it. Here's the time. This transaction ID was my transaction ID. And then you get the, you will get through it, but you have all this like overhead that you just had to handle on coins that you purchased maybe weeks back or months back or whatever. Where if you're just mining, you're mining, man. Like the pool gets a reward. They pay you incrementally, and then you're getting this incremental amount of Bitcoin over a period of time. And it's just a cost basis analysis of like, what did it cost me to get, and what did I earn? And at some point, if that number's big enough to where you're like, maybe I'm going to pay my house off, or pay a car off, or pay, do something with it, leverage it in some way. Like if you want just take 50% out or something, it gives you just an alternative way to pick up coin. So I always look at the economics of it, and then what's your long-term gain. Dennis Welshire, or is it Witchire? Thoughts on M60s versus S19 versus S21 deployment and remote container deployments. Based on our history over the last 26 months of doing this pretty regularly, and it makes no sense to talk about before that because S9s and all that are relevant now, but like the most reliable machines per our testing has been in the Cannons. The Cannons have been the most reliable, hands down. Like not even a competition. Like the Cannons have been the best, followed by probably the WhatsMiners, and then the S19s being some of the worst, especially the Pro Pluses. The Pro Pluses are probably the worst machines on the planet. The Pro Pluses are just been terrible. The latest iteration, and some even the S19K Pros. We've had a whole bunch of issues with control boards on S19K Pros. And we had 160 of them deployed in March this year, and we've had 40 of the 160 have control board issues. So it's pretty crazy. Does the Silk Road coins purchase also apply to the Coinbase? If you're talking about the Coinbase, the actual creation of the coins themselves, or Coinbase the company, but if something went through, let's run the proverbial chain, or the proverbial chain of custody through coins. If you had coins that ran through tumblers, mixers, anything that would be flagged through OSINT or any kind of forensics, so OSINT's open source intelligence, and has some level of tagging to it, and then it flows to, let's say, a counterparty that has a distributed ATM, and then you happen to be on vacation and you're in, I don't know, I'm going to make up a country. I'm not saying that any other of these countries have issues, but let's say you're just happen to be walking in Greece and you're like, oh shit, there's a Bitcoin ATM. I'm going to buy Bitcoin in Greece at this ATM. And then you get it. Depending on who sourced those coins and where they came from, the coins that are going to be printed out in the paper wallet that you receive, you could go back and start to you'll get coins sent to a wallet. You'll look at that wallet ID. You'll see your coins in said wallet, and then you'll start tracing them back. On an open source blockchain, you can't really get much forensics short of it just came from all kinds of stuff. You can start to trace back of how old some of those coins are through the UTXO. It's way easier if you had access to like Chainalysis or CipherTrace or TRM Labs or any of those kind of forensics tools. But at the end of the day, And I think there's some open source blockchain analysis tools too. There's breadcrumbs is an example of what, like if you look up breadcrumbs, that's one that's for like Ethereum, and it's kind of open source and it's out there and it has tagging and stuff in it. Not sponsored content, just letting you know what the things are out there. That gives you some history of where it came from. So you're dealing with some kind of back end history. And well, let's say you take that wallet, you hold on to it, you forget about it. 5 years later, Bitcoin's $1 million. Again, random potential prediction, $1 million Bitcoin 5 years. Let's go. Well, let's say you bought, a couple $100 worth, and now that's worth $20,000. And you're like, I want to go use these coins. You go to transfer them out. They're going to look at that time where they sat. And anytime a coin sits on a chain for a certain period of time, there a measurement on these tools of something called days destroyed. So if you bought coins and it sets for a while, a hodl, and it's on your private wallet, it's not on an exchange, it will start creating a metric called days destroyed, which just means, is this coin lost or not? Do we know? Is it in the available supply in the ecosystem? And some like finance bros look at it and look at days destroyed. And that's how they kind of figure out like Satoshi's coins never moved, certain coins never moved. A whole bunch of early Bitcoiners. My first few machines that I started getting working the night, late at night in 2010, I had like 8 machines in my basement. Anybody that's seen any of my old videos, see all of my computers I have in my basement. We used to do a lot of gaming. Still kind of do. But I started essentially mining on every computer individually to a local Bitcoin wallet. And I know multiple of those machines at one point won a full block of 50 Bitcoin back in those early days. I know I had a Dell Blue XPS that for sure at least had 3 blocks and 150 Bitcoin in that wallet. But at that time, there was no exchanges. There was speculative only pricing on what it was worth. And I know that Blue XPS, it had a pair of Raptor hard drives in it, the old school Raptor with like heatsink hard drives in RAID 0. And I know that RAID failed at some point in 2011, 2012. And I didn't back that up. That computer was like a gaming computer that happened to be mining Bitcoin at night with. So there are coins out there, at least 3 blocks that I know of on that one computer, and at least a couple more on another couple computers for at least probably 250 to 300 Bitcoin that for sure in my basement were created and lost because I never did anything with those. Now, I did centralize some of that stuff in those early days to other wallets and stuff and moved it to BTCE and some of these other exchanges, Mt. Gox, Coinbase when it first started, Cryptsy, all these different exchanges I would start to move. Now that starts creating activity from the initial Coinbase of the release of the coin when it's produced to you. So what it matters is those coins, like when you go to exercise that, and if you got them from just some random place, you may have to go through some kind of forensics BS because they were the output of a transaction that had exposure to maybe some illicit activity at the time, not knowing maybe that was. I know that some of the coins that I've moved in and had sold early in like 16, 17 timeframe, I had to have, I got a message saying, hey, these coins have went through BTCE. BTCE used to be an exchange. It was shut down. I had some coins that went through Poloniex, same way that people, hey, where'd you get these? They went through this exchange. Poloniex at the time was a quote unquote legitimate exchange, but it still had some history on it of the coins that they had outputted back to me, right? So it was, things came through Coinbase, but the origination of some of those coins had some history. So there's now sanitization that happens when it comes into like a Coinbase. They do a forensics on it, and then they quote unquote clear those out of Coinbase. Then you don't have that carry on risk. But if you're buying them random in the world, or you're doing a meetup on, forums or any kind of like 4chan, any of these forums where people are trying to move coins, having some basic understanding of where those things came from, because you could just implicate yourself in some like exchange hack or some other kind of reason, right? And my best approach personally for me has been just mine this stuff, my dudes. Like, way easier. Like, cleanest coins, no history. I get it from the coin. I get it from the pool, and it's the leanest stuff. And then when you look at, and all coins should be fungible for the same spot price, right? But the realities is, sovereign funds, people looking to do OTC transactions, sometimes will pay higher than spot to get coins that are freshly mined because there's just no history with them. It's like, man, I don't want to have to deal with all that drama. Like, because there was illicit activity that happens with some of these coins. So homebrew crypto, are those 300 BTC lost forever? Yeah, I mean, those hard drives are gone. Two of them didn't work. Could they have been recovered at that time? Probably. I mean, when you have a RAID failure on RAID 0, it gets a little complicated because it actually splits the data across both drives. Was the majority of that Bitcoin wallet on one drive versus another? And forensically, could they extract it? Who knows? I mean, at the time, man, they weren't worth anything. It was more of you got to think of the early days in Bitcoin. The early days, I'm talking 2010 into 2011, there was a lot of price speculation and discussion of what it could be from a payment network aspect. But from somebody like me at the time coming in from a tech stack standpoint, I was coming from SETI at home. I was coming from folding at home. I was coming in from an exchange of computational power where you were providing compute for a thing, and you maybe got on a leaderboard for supporting like an initiative. My early engagement with Bitcoin was in that concept. It's like, oh, I can get this thing and earn these tokens, and maybe they're worth money one day, but how many tokens can I get? It was my mental state at that point wasn't, oh, this is going to be valuable and I'm going to make money or anything like that. It was more of like coming from that folding at home, study at home, like an accomplishment thing more than technically, can I do this? Technically, can I compile this code? Technically, am I interacting with this network? And then I saw the conversation on Bitcoin Talk that it was going to be a thing. But like, it was just, when you go back and you think about it, it's like, oh my God, it was so stupid. I should have like backed these machines up. S19J XP 151 TH miner good. So the XPs, we had a handful of 140s. We had some initial problems with 140s when they were out there. The latest ones have been pretty decent. We have 140 S21s. We've had 3 that have had issues. 2 control boards, 1 power supply. We run 277. So, power supply things, I mean, sometimes we had a couple containers that run a little hot, around 182 volts. When you're running that kind of voltage, there could be some issues on the power supply. It strains it a little more. So I think it might be exhibited to that. Those have been good so far. Not too bad. But I mean, we just had some of the guys show back up from the shop pulling some machines. So I'll see if we have any more S21s in here today. I think I see a tear, but like bros, like it's just it's kind of one of those things like you just kind of move on. Like you're like, yeah, it is what it is. It's a gift back to the network of at least 300 coins I know of that are gone forever from the Bitcoin network. Awesome, my dudes. Well, you're an hour and 22 minutes. I have 185 people watching on today. I do thank you guys for your viewership. Hopefully this wasn't super boring. I'm trying to make these live streams around different topics. Please, if you're liking and subscribing and stuff, do interact with this in some capacity. Do me a favor, go out there, and if you want to see more content like this or any other type of content, do take 2 seconds, just make a post. It could be on X, it could be on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, let me know what you guys think, what you'd like to see or hear more about, maybe more screen stuff. Happy to do it. Love talking to you guys out here in this space and interacting. Love the questions. Bring some questions. You can put some of these questions. If I didn't get to your question, put it down in the YouTube description. I mean, I'm always either driving somewhere or riding somewhere or flying somewhere. And I that's what I'm looking at. Like when I'm on a flight, I'm like looking through comments. I'll answer them when I can, when I'm kind of where I can focus on it and get some answers for you guys. I'm happy to do it. See what you guys are up to, man. So make sure you're interacting with us. Share this content if you think it'll help somebody else too. If it's valuable for you, we'll try to put some chapters in this down below, and I'll catch you guys on next Friday at noon, and we'll make sure on X and all the different socials we'll provide what that content will be. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace, my dudes.